In our last video, we looked at the major rules for making nouns plural. In this video, we'll look at the exceptions to those rules. For the four main questions we ask ourselves when making nouns plural, the first two categories have a lot of exceptions, so let's explore those in more detail. We talked about how if a word ends in F or FE, you can replace the FE with VES. And there were a bunch of examples for when that was true. And also there's some words that are acceptable to be spelled with the VES ending or with an FS ending. But there are a ton of exceptions to this rule. Probably more exceptions than there are words that follow it. Let's look at the categories so we can recognize those exceptions. When a word ends in two Fs, it's a pretty safe guess that you just put an S on the end of the word to make it plural. The same goes if there's a double O, oo sound right before the F. Again, just add S to make it plural. And then there's some words that it helps to add S because it avoids confusion. For example, if you say beliefs with an F, people know you're talking about the things you believe in, as opposed to the verb where you say he believes this or she believes this. Notice that most of these exceptions end, the singular word ends in F. The only ones that end in FE on this list are giraffe and safe. There are some smaller categories too. Foreign words can just have an S added to them, like chefs from the French. Words that are abbreviations for longer words often just have an S for the plural, like saying refs instead of referees. And if you're referring to a word instead of what the word means, like no ifs, ands, or buts, you're just referring to, I don't want you using the word if. So ifs is made plural just by adding the S. After you go through these categories, there'll be a handful of miscellaneous words that are still exceptions to the VES rule, but there'll be many fewer and be easier for you to keep track of those. Because I am kind of a numbers geek, I pulled out the top 20 nouns that end in F to see how the most commonly used nouns in our language followed this rule. And so there are way more words that just have an S added for the plural than have the F changed to a VES. But I do want to point out, if you look through those blue words that just have the S added, a lot of them are words we don't often use as plural words. For example, you would normally just say stuff. I have a lot of stuff, not I have many stuffs. Also, there's another VES word that's underrepresented. Selves is a noun, and it's fairly common, but what's far more common are the words themselves, yourselves, and ourselves. But these didn't make my list because they're pronouns and not nouns. So as you can see, among the common words, it's really evenly split whether we change F to VES or whether we just add S to the end of the word. The next rule we covered in our previous video was how to make a word that ends in O plural. If there's a consonant right before the O, you add ES. So potatoes would be made plural by adding ES to it because there's a T right before the O. On the other hand, if there's a vowel right before the O, you just add S to make it plural. So videos would be made plural simply by adding an S because there is an E right before the O, and that's a vowel. The first ones we want to look into are foreign words, words that come to us from other parts of the world. There's several examples, but the most common would be Spanish words like tacos, broncos, burritos. Also Italian words like pistachios and neutrinos. In these cases, the plural is formed simply by adding S, not ES. Another category is musical terms. And really, this is a subcategory of the last one because almost all of our musical terms are Italian, which is a foreign language. But we do have several musical terms like solos, cellos, pianos, sopranos, altos. All of these, you just make them plural by adding S, not ES. Another group of final O words that only adds an S instead of an ES for the plural is abbreviations. When you say photo instead of photograph, kilos instead of kilograms, typos instead of typographical errors, memo instead of memorandum, or auto instead of automobile, when you want all those to be plural, you just add an S, not an ES. Finally, there are two special cases that are to avoid confusion. The words zero and radio have two different spellings depending on if you're using a verb or a noun. So if I had two radios, two objects playing music, I would just spell it OS. But if I wanted to say he radios for help, I would spell it with an ES at the end, RADIOES. And the same for zeros. If I asked how many zeros are in a million, I would spell it OS. But if I was referencing something that this zeroes out the formula or zeroes out the balance and I used it as a verb, it would be an OES. There are many English words that come from the Latin and keep unusual plural endings. Because Latin is divided into noun families called declensions, we see different patterns of endings. In declension 1, if the singular ends in A, the plural ends in AE. In the second declension, either the singular ends in US and the plural ends in I, or the singular ends in UM and the plural ends in A. And finally, in the third declension, the plural ends in ES. Often, the singular ends in IS, but you see with index and indices and codex and codices, there can be a few other endings for the singular. There are also many words that are the same for both the singular and the plural. A lot of them are animals. Bison, buffalo, deer, moose, sheep, and swine can all refer to singular or plural numbers of animals, along with several water animals, fish, salmon, shrimp, trout, and tuna. There's a group of vehicles also, aircraft, hovercraft, spacecraft, and watercraft, that can be singular or plural. And there's a few miscellaneous words like offspring, species, and series. We're down to the most irregular of the irregular plural nouns. And there is a group where only the vowels change. So changing foot to feet, or tooth to teeth, or goose to geese, you're only changing vowels. And the same goes for changing man to men, or woman to women. Now we're just left with a few oddballs. One person, two people. One child, a bunch of children. One mouse, three mice. A louse, or some lice. One die, a pair of dice. One quiz, two quizzes. The difference with that one is notice the Z is doubled instead of just adding ES like we do for most of the other hissing sounds. And finally, one ox or multiple oxen. I hope this helps you learn how to make nouns into plural nouns.